welcome to the Building Resilient Cities. We're looking at integrating climatic, societal, and infrastructure risks. So I'm Mark Hitton, I'm Deputy Regional Director of ICLE Europe. ICLE, if you don't know it, is a local government membership organisation. We have around 2,500 members worldwide, and we support them in implementing sustainable development. I've got a delightful panel, if I can use the word, and I feel like I'm overdressed somehow. But it's a very good panel. We've got a mix of people from different backgrounds, from political to data to implementation to policy and strategy, also tools as well. So we've got a lot to get through. The focus of today's session is probably fourfold. So we first want to highlight that the climatic, societal, and infrastructure risks cannot be treated in isolation. They need to be treated in an integrated way. So we're going to sort of first of all look at, well, what's the understanding of what that means? How do you integrate these risks? How do you deal with them? The also importance, if you don't do it, that the impact is much greater. But we're also going to look at the governance and support tools that are there, and potentially, tools that can be replicated or upscaled. Of course, moving it from one city to another city doesn't work in practice. Each city is different, but I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from this. Now, we've got a live event here, but also we've got a live climatic event. So as you see and felt, it's pretty hot. So I could have done a warm welcome to the session, but the jokes, I think, aren't funny anymore. But it wasn't just the heat. I mean, the humidity today is very high, which is why it also feels a lot hotter. But actually, in the last 3 or 4 days in London, there's been some localized flooding. So not just the heat around Heathrow Airport. There was a couple of fires, I think through lightning strikes. But also the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure has been affected. Some of you may have been affected directly. So there are some integrated aspects already, but where does the vulnerability come in? You never hear about this in the news, or what's the impact on the socially deprived areas? And this is what we also want to pick up today. So even though I've just said about London, I know London is doing a lot, and I know, Meta, that I think climate mitigation adaptation is at the heart. He's the Deputy Mayor of the Greater London Authority for Environment and Energy, and I know he's into the topic of resilience because this is the third time I've met him this year at a resilience event. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. I mean, I don't know how you manage all this. But, Meta, you're going to kick us off with a few words. So, please, take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, welcome everyone to Smart Cities World. Hey. This is the biggest ever London Climate Action Week. I should also say it's the biggest ever climate week in the world. We've got more than 1,300 events that are taking place across our city, and we've now beaten New York. So even though they may have won the NBA championships, when it comes to climate weeks, we are the champions. Look, can I firstly start by welcoming you all. My name is Mete Coban. I'm the Deputy Mayor of London for Environment and Energy. It's a huge honour to be leading our city's mission on one of the biggest challenges that we face across our city. And I say that because I think it's important to recognise, firstly, that climate change doesn't impact everyone equally. It doesn't. And you only have to look at the impacts of the heat wave this week. Or the fact that today we've got some great news around air quality, which I want to talk about, but there are 500,000 people across our city who have stunted lungs, who have asthma, who will never ever be able to breathe the full capacity of their lungs because of a crisis that they didn't cause in the first place. And that's because we're dependent on fossil fuels. And those fossil fuels, as well as releasing those toxins in air which stunt so many Londoners' lungs, they also cause massive insecurities around the cost of living for Londoners. And you only have to look at to see what's happening right now to see the impact on working class Londoners every time something happens with the volatile energy markets that we see. And then this week, the timing couldn't be more important about why we need more further climate action, right? On Monday, I was literally about to open the Climate and Health Summit. As I was about to go on stage, the heat alert got upgraded to red. That is the second time in London's history that we had a red heat alert. Only the second time. Last month was the hottest May on record in London. Last year was the hottest year on record. So it's no longer a thing that is just happening or may happen in the future. It's happening right now, and we're seeing the impacts of it right now. On Monday evening, when I woke up on Tuesday, I got a briefing from City Hall that told me the fire brigade, the London Fire Brigade, had received 400 phone calls in relation to flash floods overnight. 400 phone calls. And if you think about our infrastructure, our transport infrastructure, in 2021, when we had the flash floods, it had a cost of over £280 million to London's infrastructure and our businesses. That is a real life impact of climate change that's happening right now. But the good news is there is progress happening in cities like London. And one of the things that actually has given me a lot to take away from this London Climate Action Week already was on Monday, Tuesday, we had C40 cities, which convene here in London. Over 100 cities that are working together to really accelerate climate action, but also learning from what's happening in other cities. Yesterday, C40 cities announced a new data center pact, working with cities like Melbourne, working with cities like Phoenix, where we're already seeing the impacts of data center and the impact it's having on their energy grid, on air quality with the generators. I know there's some solutions more around the water and the impact it has on water as well, whereas previously it had much more of a bigger impact on water scarcity. But these are all things that we can learn from in London. And I think the great warming thing that I've seen this week is that cities are now cutting emissions 5 times faster than the national average. 5 times faster. And we are seeing huge progress here in London. I spoke about air quality earlier. Today, we just brought out some news that shows that premature deaths in 2019 was 4,000 per year related to pollution. Yeah? Since 2019 to now, 2024, since 2024, it's gone down by 40%. 40%. Hospital admissions, down. GDP admissions are down. Why? Because we delivered the world's largest clean air zone. And by the way, when the mayor first got elected in 2016, experts and scientists told him it would take 193 years for us to bring the air quality limits into legal limits. 193 years. Would have been impossible to imagine during our lifetime. But we achieved it in just 9 years, which is a huge milestone across our city. The work that we're doing on green infrastructure and around how we build resilience across our city, we've created the equivalent of 2,000 football pitches of green spaces across our city, more than 640,000 trees across our city since 2016. That's really important, especially on days like this, to create the calling. But we've also got to think about the built environment. And so in 2024, when we had the London Climate Resilience Review, what that really showed us, and the reason why we had the resilience review, was to understand how prepared is London for extreme heat, for flash floods, for all of the impacts of climate change, which was chaired by Emma Howard-Boyd. And on the back of that, that gave us 50 recommendations, some targeted towards the Mayor of London, some towards the national government, and some towards other actors, whether it's local authorities or civil society organizations too. And one of the things that followed from that was, there was 2 things that I just want to end on, which I think is 2 success stories of London. One was the work we're doing around surface water flooding and flash floods here in London. So we brought together the different agencies that we need to work together in response to the 2021 flash floods. And we published the Flood Ready London report and strategy, which established, by the way, 8 water catchment areas here in London to encourage that partnership working between boroughs, Transport for London, if you think about the London Fire Brigade, Environment Agency, lots of different key agencies and the role that they could play. And already that's having a huge impact in making sure that we're protecting Londoners. We're also heavily investing in nature-based solutions because we think that nature is the best solution for some of the impacts that we're seeing across our city. We brought back beavers to London after 400 years, and the beavers are incredible. If you look at Greenford Station in Ealing, that station used to get regularly flooded. Ever since we brought the beaver colony near Paradise Field Park, that station now has stopped flooding. There's a whole news article about it that came out last week on The Independent. If you Google it, you'll see it. But that is literally the real-life impact that beavers are having on our city. We're also bringing back white storks to London after 600 years too. So there's a real role for nature to really restore and heal our city, because we've spent centuries disconnecting people from nature and de-wilding our city. But the next issue is what we're dealing with this week, because we know that this week is going to be even harder, whether you're an elderly person in our city, whether you're a child in our city, whether you've got underlying health conditions in our city, for our workers. I mean, even like, for me as a young, fit and healthy adult, I feel really tough. I've had to check in on my family today to make sure that they can stay in cool, because my family still lives on an estate, and I know that it gets overheated on days like this today. And so tomorrow, I'm proud to announce that we were publishing a new Heat Ready London partnership and a new strategy, which will be set around 6 different areas. So we'll be looking at infrastructure, we'll be looking at the built environment, we'll be looking at biodiversity and helping nature flourish across our city. We'll be looking at the public health aspect of it too. And the purpose of this, which really follows the London Climate Resilience Review, is to make sure that we're preparing London, both at City Hall, but working across different agencies to make sure that we're accelerating on that. So there are some short-term things we can do. We've got 4,000 water refill points across our city. We've got over 100 water fountains that we've installed across our city to keep Londoners hydrated. We've got the trees that I spoke about to create the shading. We've got the cool spaces map where you can go onto that now if you Google it. And when you go onto that map, you will see not only green spaces where you can keep cool, but also there are like libraries and other community facilities where you can go and benefit from too. There are all of these resources that are available, but these are short-term measures that aren't going to fix the longer-term impacts that we're starting to see. So we need to really rethink about our buildings and our built environment and how do we make sure that London is protected. But I can see, Mark, I'm one of those politicians who could talk forever and ever and ever. Thank you so much for being part of this. I'm sorry I can't stay for the rest of it. I hope you have an amazing summit and an amazing London Climate Action Week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Meta. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Meta, for that. And actually, just if you don't know this, they do have the first 2 beavers that they had. They named the first one Justin Beaver, and the second one Sigourney Beaver, which I thought was quite humorous. All right, so I said we had a delightful panel, and I just want to quickly introduce them before we go on to we'll have another presentation, just set some framework, and then we'll go into the discussions. But I do want to introduce Julie Foley, who's the Director of Flood Risk Strategy and Adaptation Environment Agency, and I was speaking to her earlier saying, it's a tough job. It's got to be a tough job. We also have Alana Gluck. She's Engagement Lead at Credo. And Credo is bringing expertise into infrastructure, resilient digital innovation, and using sort of data to better understand and manage the interconnected infrastructure systems, which is ideal for this session. We've got Truman Siemens, founder and CEO of Oscar, which I think is one of the sponsors and partners here, which is a non-profit organization developing open source tools that help governments strengthen climate adaptation and resilience. And of course, we have Councillor Susan Aiken, who's leader of Glasgow City Council as well. So it is a delightful panel. They've got a lot of knowledge. So I want to get on to the next presentation to frame it, and then we can get on to the discussion.
I've got a few slides to sort of capture the climate problem and to sort of set that challenge out for you, and then I'm sure we'll have a conversation about what some of the solutions are. So I'm going to focus a bit on the opposite end of extreme heat, although they are highly interconnected, as we've just been hearing very well from Mark and the Deputy Mayor, which is about flood risk and how that's affecting cities. And I'm going to particularly focus on surface water flooding, actually, because that is where the links, particularly with extreme heat and surface water flooding, comes in particularly. But I thought you might find it helpful to see some stats from the Environment Agency, and this goes back to February 2020, and you can see major storm events that affected across England only in this particular case, including last winter. And what that message is, what basically the slide is telling us, is that we have a lot of them. They are becoming much more frequent, they're becoming really quite severe, but it's also telling us that there's a significant dividend in flood risk management, because by investing in flood protection and flood resilience, we can see it having a difference. So only this winter, very sadly, 500 people were flooded from the events that happened, particularly around the southwest. But we also saw close to 60,000 being better protected thanks to investments. Right, let me just keep going. slides are very bright colours here. This is what we call our National Assessment of Flood Risks, which is also called NAFRA. All of this information is publicly available, actually, and all the way down to postcode level. So if any of you actually want this information, you can help yourselves. And one of the things we talk about in the Environment Agency is who is at risk. There are currently just over 6.3 million properties at risk from some sort of flooding, because that's flooding from rivers, the sea, or surface water flooding. And with climate change, that number jumps to 8 million by the 2050s, which is not actually that far away. And that means by the middle of the century, we were likely to find that 1 in 4 properties in England will be at risk of some kind of flooding. That's making issues on flood risk management not just a sort of niche issue, but something that is really starting to affect the mainstream population in quite a considerable way. And it's not just properties that get affected. I'm sure you've seen when we see flooding events, you see water treatment power, but plants, roads, rail, all underwater. And this stat shows that, I'm afraid, is going to be a growing risk. So a third of major roads, a third of major railways, are all currently at flood risk, and that picture does, I'm afraid, worsen with climate change. Just a few more stats. This shows you, particularly the focus of this conference, on the kind of impact on cities. And there's a kind of really obvious point to take away here for us being in London today. But all of our major cities have flood risk of some kind or another. Perhaps not surprisingly, given that's where you have the majority of people, you have the urban effect, that's where you see the most growth. But you can, of course, see that you have 1.5 million people at risk in London specifically. So there's some really specific challenges for London. I just wanted to finally touch on the growing risk of surface water flooding. Deputy Mayor actually covered this really well, and it's a particular focus for a lot of urban centres. So, and this is an area where also public understanding is a little bit less than, say, other types of flooding, where you get overtopping of rivers or storm surges. And for those of you less familiar, surface water flooding is where you literally get torrential downpours of rain, often very sudden, often very rapid, very, very difficult for us to predict with the Met Office, and it leads to overwhelming of drains, and that leads to very fast surface water runoff, which can be incredibly dangerous, and it can be a risk to life. And the majority of risks we're seeing growing are from surface water flooding. So there's 4.6 million properties at risk of surface water flooding. Many of those are at particular high risk. So they're actually in terms of how we would categorise risk. And as you can see, over 300,000 are in London itself, which again tells you some of the challenges that cities are facing. So I wanted to just close there, Mark, because I think we're going to discuss some of the solutions.
Great. Can I take Mark as well?
Yes.
So I'm just going to give that to Truman, who's going to have a few slides as well later. So, yeah, I could see some worried faces there, Julie, but there is some optimism as well. But, I mean, it's right, we have to look at what the issues are, first of all. You know, who's going to be impacted, how and when. But I guess being the leader of a council, Susan, you get this directly, of course, and it's something I know that Glasgow has actually been having issues, but also dealing with very well, and for a number of years now. So do you want to tell us, in Glasgow, what are the sort of integrated issues that you're having to deal with? How is it impacting on the sort of most vulnerable in your city?
So Meta touched on it already. It is the case, I think, probably in most cities, that where the real world impact of climate risk is happening is also where the people with other challenges in their life are most concentrated, challenges coming from poverty, from multiple deprivation in particular. And those are also the people who are on the sharpest end of the waves of cost of living crisis and inflation, and the impact on food and energy costs of the various international crises that we're going through just now. So there is a direct impact on their health, their quality of life, their ability to access things that are going to make their lives better. And on a very basic level, that could mean regular flooding prevents you from being able to get to your apprenticeship. Because your train or your bus are running late, or it's just your street is closed off for whatever reason. Getting to your apprenticeship or getting to a job where not turning up on time could mean not keeping that job, or getting to your appointment at the job centre where not turning up on time could mean being sanctioned. So these are really direct impact on people's lives and people who are already under stress from other factors in society just now. And Meta touched on this as well. I'll maybe say it a little bit more explicitly. That then creates an impact on community cohesion. It makes our communities, it makes our democracy vulnerable to political extremism, to the threats of the far right. That hasn't been as prevalent in Scotland as yet, as it has perhaps here south of the border, but it is coming, and we have seen it start to emerge in the most recent Scottish Parliament elections. So there are a whole number of things coming together there, and then on a global scale as well, as climate impact, climate devastation around the world adds to the conflicts that we're seeing and creates much more movement of people, more refugees coming to cities like London, like Glasgow, like the other big cities across the UK. That creates another vulnerability to that community cohesion, to our housing supply, there's a whole number of things coming together right now. And it would, I think, it leads to you either have to face it head on, and exactly as Julie has done, look very hard at the challenges and the problems that we've got, and try to come up with solutions for those, or you go to bed and pull the covers over your head, and that isn't an option. It's certainly not an option for me. So what we've tried to do in Glasgow is, particularly over the past couple of years, is pull together all of our different approaches. So we had a really good climate strategy and really good strong climate ambitions, and we were making very good progress on that. We also had an adaptation strategy, and we had a resilience strategy. And we realised, no, these things can't sit separately. They all have to be approached together. I think particularly in the context of investment, we, like all public authorities, we are facing massive constraints on our budgets. I look at some of the flood prevention infrastructure that Glasgow has invested in the past. And really amazing work that's been done, like absolutely pioneering. I'll not linger on it right now, but if you're interested in our smart canal, which was a world first, I can tell you about that. But the reality is, actually, the capital flows, the capital funding that delivered that infrastructure is not available to us as a public authority. We certainly don't have it in our own coffers just now. So we're going to rely on partnership and collaboration with others. We're putting a lot of time and a lot of some of our own investment as well into having a pipeline of investable projects that we can work with institutional and private finance on to deliver, but making sure that that's not just cherry picking the stuff that's going to deliver revenue returns for investors, which is energy and heat transition, for example, very clear revenue returns there. But it also has to make sure that we're bundling up the stuff that's adding, really going to deliver that social and economic value and benefit to our citizens. And that doesn't always have a clear revenue return. It's not a clear investment proposition a lot of the time. But if we only do one thing and we don't do the other side of it, then we are not building in resilience. So that's I think the challenge for cities right now. We know what we need to do. We know what our risks are. We are living with them every single day. We are seeing the impact of them every single day. Is how we get ourselves into a place to maximise the benefit for our residents, our citizens, of the climate investment that we know is out there and waiting to be invested, how we get ourselves essentially fit for purpose for being able to be good partners, good collaborators with investors, but that they're also good partners and collaborators for us, and in my case, the people that I'm elected to represent, and who are relying on me and other democratically elected leaders to deliver for them and try and ease the stresses that they're facing in their lives just now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, that was quite comprehensive there with the number of points you covered there, but just I think there's 2 or 3 to pull out there. The political aspect, actually, there was a couple of slides earlier. I don't know whether you saw that, but the most disillusioned areas of population within the UK, certainly within England, were voting quite differently to other areas. And this, of course, was where there was most potentially flood risks, which was actually quite stark for me when I saw that slide earlier. I think the investment side is also absolutely key, but it has to be done in partnership, as you say. We don't have a business here, we don't have the finance side covered so much, but I mean, I think they're absolutely key stakeholders to have on board. So I'm going to move on to Alana now. I mean, we've talked about sort of the importance of infrastructure investments there. I mean, what's your experience of how adaptation measures have delivered equitable outcomes, and particularly for the most vulnerable communities?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I think I will just give an overview of what CREDO is to help contextualize my answer. So CREDO stands for the Climate Resilience Decision Optimizer. It is a digital platform which has been funded through the Ofgem Strategic Innovation Fund. Ofgem, for those of you who might be from different countries, is the UK's energy regulator. And our CREDO platform is being developed to combine climate data with asset information data and network data from across utilities, together with cascading risk models to understand where there are vulnerabilities in our system and how we can take that systems of systems approach to adaptation measures. So how does that relate to understanding how we can best improve outcomes for vulnerable communities? So within CREDO, we're able to pinpoint where we can get the most social, economic, and environmental impact from a physical intervention within a utility network. So literally pinpointing which energy substation is likely to fail because of a flood or because of overheating, and then where that energy substation actually supplies a water treatment plant or a hospital or a school. And by providing that information to utilities providers, they can make better decisions about how they develop their strategic plans. In the UK, there are regulatory cycles where they have to put together business plans to say where they're going to do some infrastructure build. And so with information provided by CREDO, those companies can say, it's that substation, we're going to improve its resilience against this specific climate scenario, so that that cascading impact isn't felt to those communities.
Okay, so it sounds like a very targeted approach to that, and to help prioritize utility companies how they're going to spend and upgrade their infrastructure. So it's very interesting. And how can we find out about that?
You can find out more about CREDO via Connected Places Catapult, which is one of the UK's innovation agencies for infrastructure and transport. Just go on to the website. You'll also find information on both UK Power Networks websites and Anglian Water's websites, who are 2 of our strategic partners.
Okay, great. All right, well, that's a tool that we've already heard about. So we're now moving on to Truman. I mean, this is a connection to data, and data, I mean, it's absolutely key. I was at an event yesterday where data came top on the sort of missing element at this stage, and how to use data to then feed into tools and to feed into software that can then help prioritize and help cities really target and prioritize what they're doing. And I think this is quite difficult to get hold of, reliable data. But Truman, I think you've got a couple of slides as well that you're going to talk us through. So please.
Before turning to slides, the first one is just to provide some context, and that is that there's, I think, really good news about the ability to tackle a range of these challenges and to integrate social and economic dimensions with the more technological and asset level in part, and there's probably some concerns about AI and data centers out there. At least there's a lot of good that you can do in climate-related and social solutions. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. I spent the afternoon yesterday at Google talking with a number of peer organizations that are developing tools, many of which include open source. And so I'm going to tell you about ours as an example of that, but also sort of point you to some of the others that are of interest. Oscar is developing a platform of free open source tools. We're a nonprofit for governments and the organizations that support them to analyze their risk, find and identify good quality data, or allow universities and others that are working with them to provide data in, then to identify the financial aspects of an operational risk to particular assets, prioritize investments, as you're pointing out, across a range of different asset types, transportation, logistics, housing, and then to develop high quality plans and funding proposals. So this is where there's AI used across a lot of our solution. Part of it is agentic AI. So this is a look at the asset level, the types of asset level analysis, which it goes quite deep for the users that are developing capital plans and need to have know exactly the risk to, for example, a tube station or to a roadway, but also to be able to generate simple images that work for stakeholder engagement, community engagement. You're seeing the physical risk here, but it's now, particularly with AI support, you can layer on the social and economic dimensions in a way that provides actionable information that takes into account those considerations. This is a look. Didn't really render very well, but this is a look at the front end, what you call a user interface for the platform for non-technical users, including the public, to be able to understand, democratize access to an understanding of climate risk, and to be able to operate the back-end tools without having to be a programmer or to be technically savvy, and then to walk through the process of creating actionable plans and funding proposals. So using essentially agentic AI to develop proposals that are based on whether it's a bond offering or a blended finance type of a proposal, what has succeeded in the past. And documenting it for success. So just to sort of, and the risks that we cover, so obviously flood's well covered here in the UK, but we cover a range of other hazards, chronic and extreme heat, different types of flooding, water risk, so both drought and water risk, not so much a concern here, but certainly in many other places. And then to be able to look at not just as you do, not just the individual assets, but systems of assets, and understanding those, for example, in telecoms, which things must be made resilient so that the system can flourish, and if you don't have your telecom system, demand disaster response and the like is impossible. So I'm happy to talk more about this or about the other tools that are out there that may be of interest and usable to you that are under development after we've got a booth out here. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And is that easy to find online, the tool? Go to your...
So we are the tools that we're building on have been developed by BNP Paribas, Goldman, and others for climate-aligned financial decisions. We're repurposing those for use for public service and public interest uses, we don't have the tools available to use online. We want to stress that, but you can test and get an understanding of how this works in 2 different prototypes that we have, which will be released for use by governments in about a year's time. Yeah.
I think these types of tools play an important role, and it's good to see, well, it's not just online. You need some probably coaching with it. You need to understand the whole process of it.
Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why we and others in this ecosystem, and Google included, are open sourcing things so that a consultant can use it in work in supporting Glasgow or another city, or an organization that's developing a power sector specific tool can use part of the technology without any cost for innovation. So
It's good to see that it's open source and that AI is being used, I think, for good use in that sense here. Okay, I'm going to move on to sort of the governance side of it. And Julie, I'm going to start with you from a national government perspective. Now, we talked, the importance of stakeholders at the local level. Now, one thing that probably hasn't come up, at least I didn't hear it so much this morning, but I may have missed part of it, is the multi-level governance, for example. I think to make changes in infrastructure, certainly transport infrastructure, for housing, for many of the topic areas that cities have to deal with, they have to work with sometimes the regional and certainly the national government, so legislation can actually be a barrier to a certain extent. And I think both the national government realise this, and of course the local government realise this as well, and how they're working together. But I wanted to ask you, Judy, just from the sort of governance perspective at national level, what are the challenges and how are you working then with cities, providing data, as you showed earlier, but in practical ways?
So in multiple ways. So the Environment Agency, it's just in England, so there are different bodies that cover Scotland and Wales, for that matter. But we work nationally and we work locally, so with individual local authorities and with city regions and other partners. And in terms of our flood and coastal investment programme, the government recently made a commitment through the recent spending review here for around £7.9 billion of pipeline in flood risk management. You were just talking really well about the importance of sustained investment. That investment is over the next 10 years, and we did have to make quite a considerable case to actually have investment that goes beyond parliamentary periods or transcends parliamentary periods, because we know that the kind of flood projects that we need to invest in, they take time to develop, time to design, time to take forward, time to get community buy-in, often several years, and that will often be the lifetime of a particular parliament. So it's been quite important for us to be able to think about flood and climate resilience in a way that goes across parliaments. So very positively, this government has currently recognised that with a 10-year programme. And that's a combination of things, Mark. So it's not just, I guess, what you might see as the traditional flood defences, obviously really iconic things like here in London, like the Thames Barrier, for example, that the Environment Agency looks after and makes sure that it provides, very, very good tidal flooding for London and the wider estuary. But actually other solutions like nature-based solutions, which the Deputy Mayor was talking about, sustainable drainage, but blue-green sustainable drainage, so not grey sustainable drainage, so permeable paving, rain gardens, and investments like that. So our programme would invest in all of those things. So we do that at national level, and then regionally, Mark, we would also work with cities like Manchester City region, London, of course, and other places. And here in London, the Deputy Mayor referred to one of those partnerships, which we call Flood Ready, in terms of Flood Ready London. And that was particularly precipitated following the 2021 surface water flooding events, which were really quite catastrophic here in London. And that's led to a huge amount of work with many partners. So the GLA, the London councils, the Environment Agency, but actually also importantly Thames Water and other partners as well in terms of private sector partners to look at sustainable drainage notably and how we can find better ways of managing sustainable drainage in really compact spaces in London. So a lot of it is investment in terms of you've got to have the investment and there's a very, very strong case for that. Just to give you a stat, Mark, our research in the Environment Agency shows that for every £1 invested in flood risk management, there is at least a £5 return in terms of flood damages avoided, that is really high in terms of an exchequer benefit. And it is showing actually, and that's because the extent of flood damages are huge on as I was just showing you, on infrastructure, on people and property. So the case for investment is certainly there and will be growing, but we can't take forward things without working in partnership.
Invest to save, in that sense, that's probably the motto. Yeah, I mean, I think then from a local perspective, how are you seeing that? I mean, it sounds like dialogue is key to this. I mean, maybe not so much the legislation, learning from each other and saying, well, what are the challenges? How can we work together? And long-term planning. Susan, from a city perspective.
I mean, I'm always tempted to say, from a city perspective, what we want national governments and national agencies to do is give us the money and then get out of the way and let us do it.
I knew you
would but we also recognise that while cities and local governments more widely have to be part of delivery, they absolutely have to be, because a lot of these things that we're talking about, a lot of these interventions are quite disruptive to people's lives. If you think about moving away from flooding slightly, but if you think about housing retrofit, for example, which is a really significant issue for Glasgow, I mean, you're actually physically going into people's homes to put interventions into their properties. So that has to be done on a civic basis. There has to be that connection with communities, and not just a democratic connection, but the ability to understand where communities are and bring them with you. But equally, we also need capacity and expertise, which doesn't always exist at the city level. So it does have to be genuinely multi-level. And I think particularly where there's national agencies involved in Scotland, we have the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency is your equivalent, SEPA. We do have very good working relationship with them. We work really, really closely with them. And in Glasgow, we've had over the past sort of decade or so now, we have one of the most boring sounding projects of all time, but I actually love it. It's the Greater Glasgow Metropolitan Strategic Drainage Project. But you would absolutely love it, Julie. But it is absolutely focused on, it is nature-based solutions. It is often quite low impact technological interventions, and it is very much in communities, and communities that were just plagued for years by intermittent flooding. We are seeing that make a difference. And it's the kind of thing we can point to when as this stuff is getting worse, and we're seeing more and more monsoon type rainfall in Glasgow with a 200-year-old underground drainage infrastructure. So when we need to do the big stuff, and we have Scottish Water, which is Scotland's publicly owned water company, undertook a massive infrastructure investment in the south side of Glasgow just a few years ago, and built a huge underground tunnel, which the roads were disrupted for months as a consequence of that. But I think because of the lower intervention flood mechanisms that we'd been putting in place for quite some time, there was that understanding within communities that something needed to be done. So we were sort of, and also because it was quite an exciting big engineering thing, which Glaswegians love as well, we were able to bring communities with us more. So the expertise came from the national agency Scottish Water, but the connection and the community leadership came from the local level. And I thought that's a good example of why that multi-level stuff is absolutely necessary, and why cities can't be missed out in this. Even when it is the really big scale stuff, cities still have to be part of it. They still have to be part of that overall delivery partnership.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we've got just 2 minutes left, 2 to 3 minutes. I'm going to start with Alana and Truman here for this one. And normally at the end you say, well, what, to the audience you address, well, what's the first step that you can take, or what's something you can take home? I'm going to turn that around a little bit and call this a confession session, if that's all right. And I did this quite recently, actually, at a public authority event, and actually there was a police authority there, and they did confess, it was for procurement. She confessed that they purchased 5,000 bulletproof vests without testing them. And I didn't ask how actually they found out that they didn't work. But she said that they didn't work, but there was nobody injured in that. But and I won't say their name because this is being recorded as well. So this is why I'm coming to you two first, because I think if you can say, what do you think the biggest mistake a city has made for addressing climate resilience, particularly for vulnerability groups? And that'll give you some time to think about it, because it is being recorded, so you may want to maybe choose another city, and then also from the Environment Agency perspective. But you've got 30 seconds. So, Alondra, do you want to start?
So I don't have like a specific event in mind, but where I think cities can help is in convening communities, businesses around a use case to understand shared risk and collective impact. We can't do clever things with data without having people buy into the purpose for sharing it.
Yeah.
So that's where cities, I think, can play a real role, and where there are cities like Glasgow that have done really well on this.
So the mistake being they're not talking to stakeholders. 2 minutes in 15 seconds, if that's possible.
So the vast majority of adaptation and resilience plans that are out there are based on old science. And so the specs for the interventions are off from what's necessary.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Susan, can I ask you to then confess?
I'm not going to pick on a specific city, and to be honest, I'm going to say perhaps what I think a lot of cities do, and what Glasgow was at risk of doing at one point a few years ago, which is treating your climate policies as something separate from everything else. You know, and then going, oh, we don't have any money, we'll just need to stop doing that. Because in actual fact, your climate interventions are also your biggest opportunity for community resilience, for physical resilience, and for driving social and economic equity in your communities as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. The biggest mistake is working in silos, I think, at a local authority level. Julie, for you.
Yeah, I really like that one as well. I definitely agree. I think having spent about 20 years working on flood risk management for the Environment Agency, obviously, for me, it's all kind of obvious. Actually, it isn't to a lot of people. So I often find that when I do go and talk to a local flood group, they don't know what their flood risk is. They don't know what it's going to mean for them in the coming decades. And they haven't looked at whether or not their area is at risk or what type of flooding they face. So a really basic message that we often say, Mark, and I just constantly repeat, is that please check what your flood risk is. And you can go to gov.uk and you can check it out, and it's all free.
Yeah.
And you can also freely sign up to flood warnings. It's all free. So that's something that I think is quite an important message, is actually just general basic flood awareness.
Great. Well, then I think you've answered the question very well without it then coming back on you. I think that's certainly deserves a round of applause, and a thank you very much to the panel.